Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
On today's show, we want to talk about the struggle you are facing in your life. Well, maybe not the specific struggle, but we all face struggle. And when I say struggle, I don't mean challenges. There's challenges we all face. You know, maybe the challenge of raising children, the challenge of finding your next career move, the challenge of getting through school or college. Yeah, the challenges we all face are basics of life. And then there's struggle. And it's almost as if struggle is our relationship to challenge, because we all have challenges, right? But any one of those things I just mentioned, or other things I didn't mention, could also be struggles that we have, where we elect to have I don't know if the combative is the right word, but a difficult relationship with those challenges, and it ends up being struggle. So something like, let's say you have a certain political ideology, and there's something, people are in office that you don't like, and it's a challenge. That challenge can turn into a struggle, a resistance you have, a struggle you have, something you're frustrated about and you're rising up against. And your relationship to that challenge that would just be a normal challenge now changes, and it's more intense for you, and it's harder to let it go. It's harder to move through your life without it being so intense all the time.
Like the emotional response you have to the challenge that takes even more energy to, like if this challenge was going to take some resource or a certain percentage of resource, the fact that you have this emotional reaction or response to it is actually robbing even more resource. And so then the struggle becomes like the difference between challenge and struggle is almost like the resource units that are represented in it. In a challenge, there's going to be resource units that are represented in solving the challenge. And in a struggle, the resource units in the struggle is like this, like even more is required in order to get through it. I think that's usually how people define struggle. Am I kind of on what you're talking about?
Absolutely. So like growing up, my parents, we had challenges of living the right way and obeying God in our religious paradigm. And there were societal and cultural influences that challenged their faith. And I watched them emotionally attach to those challenges in a way where it became now a struggle. And they saw those things coming from all over the place, coming at them, like almost attacking them in a way. And I adopted that too. I lived into my 20s that way, where I started to see the challenges now. Oh no, this is something that's a struggle I got to struggle through this to the end of my life, and heaven will be my reward kind of thing. And I think what ends up happening is we can then become addicted to the emotional attachment to those struggles and those challenges, or that struggle, that struggle we have with those challenges. It's an emotional addiction almost. And now I don't know if we know when that happens, our identity gets wrapped in it, and we may not know who we are without it at that point. And the question I would have is, what happens if that's removed from someone? What happens next? Because now it's almost like we're addicted to that thing, that emotional experience of that challenge.
That makes me think of the Buddhist concept of pain versus suffering, where pain is part of life. You're always going to have pain. Pain is a feedback mechanism that tells you that something's off or wrong or needs attention. But suffering is your response to pain. It's effectively the inability to accept what you're experiencing. It's an attachment to not feeling pain. And so pain is something that you're going to experience no matter what. And so the Buddhist concept is to surrender to it, is to acknowledge that is part of it and surrender to it and not be attached to not feeling pain. And when you're attached to not feeling pain, that's when along with pain comes suffering. So pain is not optional, but suffering is elective. And that's kind of what it sounds like you're talking about with this idea of challenge versus struggle. Like challenge is something that is part of life. You're just going to experience challenges. But the struggle, which is now an emotional, sort of emotional, I don't know if you would call it like luggage that comes with challenge. Your relationship to it, that it's like it's too much, it's a lot, and it's like, and I shouldn't have to feel that. I shouldn't have to go through this challenge. It should be easier than that. And the struggle is part of this lack of acceptance of the challenge that you're experiencing. And I think when I think of things like struggle, and of course, mimetically, we've picked up this idea, the concept, the struggle is real and people really sympathize with each other through their struggles. And I think that there's some things in life that are legitimate struggles. Just like while I appreciate the Buddhist concept, there is some suffering that we're going to experience in life because the pain, we have not done whatever work a Buddhist needs to do in order to get to a place where they can fully accept the levels of pain they're going to be experiencing at times. Meaning that if you are a monk that's, taught yourself to, meditate while sitting on a bed of nails with other monks smacking you with canes, then you probably are up for just about any pain that life throws at you. And if you're not one of those people, then you probably can tolerate certain amounts of pain up into the threshold of maybe you believing that your physical life is threatened, and you're going to be experiencing suffering at that time because you may not have done all of the skill development you need to do in order to deal with that level of pain, and therefore now suffering is a part of your reality. And so it's also not just a matter of acceptance, it's also going through whatever skill development one needs to do to have that level of acceptance in order to avoid all that suffering. And I think that that's the same thing with the idea of struggle. There's going to be times when life just feels like a struggle. We interviewed our friend Dan a couple podcasts ago, where he talked about his experiences on the Continental Divide Trail, which is the third of these extremely long hikes that he's done. He's hiked 8,000 miles now. He's a very accomplished hiker. And he talked about one of the around dozen times that he almost died on the CDT. And it was a very harrowing experience. And I would say that was real legit struggle for him. And he probably now in retrospect sees them as challenges. But at the time, the amount of discomfort he was going through and the amount of physical pain he was dealing with made it that it was a legit struggle. So I think there are times and moments in life that we are going to feel like we are truly struggling through something. But I think what you're talking about is less, does struggle exist? Just like, pain exists, but suffering is elective. This idea of challenges exist, but maybe struggling is elective. I think that suffering and struggle are sometimes elective, but most of the time, we're going to feel them. They are just a part of life. And I think you're talking less about whether or not there's merit to them and more, is there an addictive quality to them? Is there a moment when our identity has gotten wrapped up into this idea of struggle? And if that's the case, then what happens when the thing that ostensibly caused the feeling of struggle, what happens when that gets removed?
Yeah, let's take maybe a couple that has broken up through a divorce or a separation of some sort. And maybe there's kids involved and there's this challenge with each other. They don't see eye to eye, but that challenge goes into struggle where they now are emotionally attached to the challenge and they're arguing, with each other. The kids are involved. It's kind of this big mess between two people. What happens if one person just decides not to play that game anymore? The addiction or the emotional investment in struggling against that other person, it's like almost like you're no longer in love, you're almost in hate in a way toward that other person, hypothetically. Now you stop playing the game and the other person, they're addicted to that struggle with you. And now it's like, well, they try to reattach the struggle. They try to reinitiate it. They try to do whatever they can because they're addicted to how it made them feel or addicted to the interaction or something. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about. And we've probably all seen it. I think relationships is a good example of this because I think we've all seen it there in watching a couple go through that romantically, right? But it happens with friends. It happens with religious paradigms. It happens with political ideologies. All these things. Like right now at the time of this recording in the United States, there's this idea of a resistance. There's this undercurrent of a resistance. Well, what happens if the thing that you're resisting is removed, if you're a person that's resisting something? What happens then, I guess, is the question I have. The meta question is, what happens if the struggle is removed? Will people know what to do? Will people, and you particularly listening, whatever your struggle is in life, whether it's with a partner, mimetic, religious, political, cultural, will you know what to do when that's removed from you or it's just no longer an issue? And I bet you, hypothetically, I'm going to posit this idea, most of us wouldn't. Most of us wouldn't know what to do because we're addicted to this. and it's getting worse from what I can see.
Yeah, even if a person wouldn't necessarily see themselves as addicted, I do believe that struggles and having that kind of relationship to challenges wires us in a certain way. And we are homeostatic creatures. We're always looking for homeostasis. And so if we're wired to be in a framework of struggle, particularly for an extended amount of time, then when the thing that ostensibly caused the struggle gets removed, there's a temporary sense of relief. And the assumption, I believe, is that the relief will just keep going. Like you'll just continue to feel a sense of relief. And then the vacuum that's created will then be filled in potentially with good, positive stuff. And unfortunately, if we have wired ourselves to be in a place of struggle, and those are the neural pathways that our brain is the most familiar with, then after that temporary feeling of relief, because we do get that, when the thing goes away, we will get a rush of relief. But relief is much more short-lived than I think we expect it to be. And then once the relief is gone, then our brain goes, okay, now what? And then it defaults back to the wiring that we've programmed inside of it. And if that is a sense of struggle, or a sense of, in the Buddhist concept of pain versus suffering, a sense of suffering, then, because I'm kind of seeing them as sort of synonymous of the two. They're not the same, but they're really good synonyms in my mind. If you've wired yourself for struggle, then that emotion is going to come up for you, because that's what your brain is used to. Your brain is going to start kicking up things around struggle. And then it's a matter of your brain looking for rationalizations for struggle. Like it's trying to rationalize the emotion it's already feeling. And so in those kinds of cases, then it's not that you have a struggle and you're looking to get out of it. It's that you have the wiring for struggle, and now you're looking to attach that wiring to something else. And you're looking for something that justifies that sense of struggle. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about.
This is exactly what I'm talking about, because what's going to happen, I'm going to posit an idea here that might be controversial, but I think the world on a global scale is the best it's ever been. I think we are doing better as humanity than ever before. And if you were to tune into Twitter or the media or social media, or sit down at the Thanksgiving table here in the United States during the holidays with your family, or whatever holiday you celebrate in whatever country you're in, and you talk to family and friends, you'd never know it. You'd think we're living in the worst time period of history. You'd think that the world is the worst it's ever been. And I just don't simply think that's true. I think we're the best we've ever been. Now, does that mean everyone has all the opportunities? Have we solved all the world's problems? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying on a long enough timeline, more things in the world are going better than they've ever gone better before, or they're going good more than they've ever gone good before. And with this heightened sense of struggle that we're attaching ourselves to, we're zoomed in on it in certain ways. Things are more, everything's more flavorful. Let's put it that way. You know, you go somewhere you can't just have like one flavor of soda now. If you go to like McDonald's or something, there's a soda machine with like 57 million flavors of different types of sodas that you can get out of like the single machine. And everything has like multiple options and add-ons and extras and enhancements and supersize this and make this bigger and more intense. And like everything's optimized and extreme to the degree. I think struggle's the same way. We've optimized this, and it made everything so extreme. And the world's doing good, better than it's ever done before. Again, that's my opinion. Could be controversial. So what happens in a world that's actually getting better? Problems are actually being solved. Technology is actually providing solutions, and it's creating some more challenges. I get it. But overall, I think humanity's doing better. And we're addicted to this heightened, supersized version, ultimate flavorful struggle that we've addicted ourselves to. That's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe to never be happy or satisfied, ever, if we're that way. And so the question I have is, what happens as individuals? What can we do as individuals to start thinking about this and start unhooking ourselves, unaddicting ourselves to this struggle? What can we do going forward to start removing this from our lives and preparing ourselves for when it is removed from our lives, that we can actually be fulfilled and happy in a world? Because none of the world's problems are ultimately going to be solved by the time you're dead. Like, I'm going to die before all the world's problems are solved. So if I struggle my whole life in anxiety and upsetness and intensity and supersized struggle, I know these problems aren't going to be solved, but the world is getting better. When do I get to just be chill and enjoy life for what it is? That's my hypothetical question to myself and you listening. When can we just sit back and go, okay, life's good. Let's enjoy life for what it is and not struggle against everything all the time on this extreme way.
I mean, I don't know if I have answers.
This is an open question to the universe in a way for a discussion.
I have some pattern recognition, or at least I have things that are coming up for me as you're talking. I don't think I have necessarily answers. But the two things that pop up for me, the first one is that I do think that there is a fear. This is related to the idea of letting people finish thoughts that are threatening to us. That if we entertain their thoughts when we don't agree with them, we're somehow sanctioning them, we're somehow agreeing with them just by letting them speak. There's a weird conflation that we have made in modern society, that same mentality that tells us not to let people finish the thoughts that we disagree with them on or speak about things we disagree with, that's somehow us sanctioning them. I think there's a similar mentality that gets carried over into this idea that if we stop struggling or believing or identifying this idea that we have to constantly be struggling in this world, that we've become disloyal to the causes that are important to us. That we know that we're fighting the fine fight if there's struggle involved. And this is programming I grew up with in my religious past. And I don't think that this is just a religious idea. I think it's capitalized on by religion. I think religion is really, really good at sort of leveraging this to its nth degree. But I suspect that this is sort of a human quality or characteristic, which is that if we're struggling, that must mean that we're doing something worth struggling for. That it's almost like struggle gives us meaning. And if we're not struggling, then are we not doing something meaningful in our lives? And also, if we stop struggling, are we somehow giving a message to the universe that we believe everything's done? And if that's the case, then are we being disloyal to the causes that we believe are important? As if struggle is like a one-to-one correlation with, like making sure that our cause is represented. So I think that that's the first thing that comes up for me, is that people don't want to be disloyal to the things that they believe are important. And if they relax and let themselves enjoy the ride, or maybe even have gratitude, because you're talking about the controversial idea that things are better than they ever have been. Well, it's not better for every individual human being on the planet than it's ever been in the past.
I'm talking holistically.
But holistically, I think that there is like no question that things are better than they've been in the past. If you just look at statistics, that is not really a question. Like, things are legit better than they've ever been in the past in every possible conceivable way, for the most part. And we're human, so there's a lot more to do. And because we're creating all this technology that solves a bunch of problems, but also carries with it its own implications, technologies that we haven't really evolved to understand how we're supposed to be, what our relationship is supposed to be to them.
Climate. I could see people arguing climate is not as good as it was, but that's the only one I can think of as an exception, on a holistic, big picture level.
Yeah, well, there's definitely issues there. And also, I would argue that that's one of the challenges that still needs to be solved, right? So even that, but I life expectancy, infant mortality rates, global education, the ability to have access to resource, food production and distribution, the fighting of diseases, like inoculations. Just the list goes on and on and on. So in aggregate, yes, it is definitely better. And I think that the fear is that if we rest into that, because we know we're homeostatic creatures, but we assume that homeostatic means lazy. We assume that means that we're automatically going to go to a lazy position, that if we acknowledge that things are good and show true gratitude and appreciation for the progress that's made, then that somehow means that we're denying that more needs to be done, as if gratitude and apathy somehow walk hand in hand, which they don't. I think you can be grateful for a lot of stuff and acknowledge that it needs to be changed.
I think people also conflate gratitude with endorsement.
Yes.
Not just apathy.
Yes, exactly. Kind of like I was saying, if you let somebody complete a thought that you don't agree with, Actually, I think endorsement would be a better word. This idea that if you like say let somebody speak on a topic that you disagree with or you don't like their conclusions, you're somehow endorsing them, which is not how that works at all. Allowing somebody to complete thoughts you disagree with, all that is letting somebody complete thoughts you disagree with. It doesn't necessarily have any bigger implication than that. But yes, it's this idea that we're endorsing things. And that's not necessarily the case, but I think that that's the fear. I think the second thing that comes up for me is that we've talked about, and you even mentioned this, I think, before, we've talked about this idea of the Deferred Life Program. And the Deferred Life Program, I think we even had an entire podcast called the Deferred Life Program, which is this idea that people keep kicking the can of the actual living of their life into the future. We grew up in religious paradigms that told us that our real lives were coming. Like we needed to sacrifice this corporal life to God, and then our real lives were going to happen in the future after Armageddon or after what is it when you get a disembodied evacuation into the
rapture?
After the rapture or whatever, right? So there's a lot of religious paradigms that very clearly state a deferred life program, but I think we do it also when we're raising kids, that we don't live for ourselves, we live for our children. But if everybody always lives for their children, then nobody gets a life, right? Because you're always kicking the can to the next generation. The only people who get a life in those scenarios are the people who choose not to have children. So there's lots of different ways of going about a deferred life program. And I think getting addicted to struggle is one of them. Like if you are addicted to struggle and it's always about this fight that you've got to be constantly doing, you've got to constantly struggling, constantly be fighting, making sure that you've got your eye on this thing that needs to be changed and there's no rest for the wicked. That's another form of the deferred life program. It's just one that's been secularized. And I think on that topic, I've seen a lot of correlations between the things I grew up with in a religious context that have been brought into a more secularized, context that is basically the same thing that I grew up with religion. But now it's all secularized, and so it's a little sneakier. And I think this is one of those that's sneakier. That struggle, that deferred life program through struggle, I think is a sneaky thing that shows it's not a religious idea, it's a human idea, but religion has gotten really good at capitalizing on it.
Well, and in the midst of it being secularized, it's missing the elements of gratitude, grace, and forgiveness.
Yeah, it's almost worse.
Right? It's just all the struggle, hostilities without the benefits that come with it too. Because there's a lot of harsh things with religious paradigms that aren't always good. And there's good things that come with them too, right? Those ideas of grace, forgiveness, understanding. Mercy,
setting yourself aside for others.
All that. So I think that's some of the challenge with that. I think also this notion of deferred life, it's a distraction, deferred life. I think you're onto something there when you talk about that. And for me, I've noticed that when I get caught up in quote unquote the struggle, as we're defining it in this show, that emotional attachment to, I got to rail against fill in the blank with whatever, I find myself not doing what I was put on earth here to do, which is create and bring my gifts to the world. I'm distracted. It's kind of like what Julia Cameron talks about in the book, The Artist's Way, a shadow artist. It's like a shadow creator. Somebody that's doing something that's not really the thing I was put here to do, but it feels productive. It feels like I'm doing something worthy. It feels like I should, like it's beneficial and I'm contributing. But usually it's just posting something, or saying something, and I'm realizing less articulate. This is like a mantra I have in my life now, weirdly enough, because what I do for a living is articulate. Well, hopefully it's articulate. You listening might disagree. But articulation is kind of our job, a podcast. We articulate. But I keep having this little mantra run in my head. Less articulation, more demonstration. Less articulation, more demonstration. So every time I feel like, I've got to struggle against this, and I want to go articulate or correct or calibrate something or speak out truth or rail against something, I go, wait a second. I could be much better served by demonstrating. Go create that next piece of artwork or output or video or podcast. Speak a good message in the world. Stop just trying to correct everything all the time. We talked about this on the last podcast, the critical podcast. But stop trying to articulate correct all the time. Just output. Create new good stuff in the world, whatever that looks like. And when I do that and I get away from being distracted by all this struggle, the struggle that's presents itself endlessly in life, I feel great. I feel like I'm on purpose and mission again. Like at our live event a couple months ago at the Profiler Training, we're there creating for 6 days. It was during this like crazy political upheaval here in the United States. There were like these trials and crazy stuff going on. in Congress, and I just would walk past the television set every morning in the lobby of the hotel to the room we were teaching in. I didn't give two craps, man. It didn't bother me at all because I was doing something creative in the world. I was outputting. I was connecting with our audience and our students and real people in real life. And stuff was happening and people's lives were getting changed and we're learning information together. And I'm on stage with you enjoying teaching together. And I realized, my God, I need more of this in my life. This struggle, the I don't know what to do with my life every day kind of struggle, and I'm just going to go and rail against whatever, fill in the blank. When you're in an output of creativity and you're actually contributing, that stuff just fades away. And it's like, why did I even care about that in the first place, ever? So after that event, I came back and I just started ruminating on that experience and went, more demonstration, less articulation. This struggle stuff is bullshit. And it's such a distraction. And we're going to get addicted more and more to it if we don't stop as individuals and reconnect ourselves to our actual purpose in this life. It's going to get real bad for us. And we have individual control over that. You listening right now, you don't have to be addicted to the struggle. Maybe society is. Maybe the people around you are, your friends and family, but you don't have to be. I don't have to be. Antonia doesn't have to be. And that gets me excited because what can we do if we remove our addiction from that and we focus on outputting positive things?
Yeah, the struggle is such a resource hog too. Like there's two ways to solve a problem. There's to go at it directly, and then there's to go at it while bitching and moaning the entire time. Or just hyping up what the experience is. You don't even have to be bitching about it. You can just be going in your own mind, talking to yourself about how terrible and hard and difficult this is. Such a resource hog. I think when I think about this, I know you talked a lot about, and we've been talking a lot about people who have this idea of railing against whatever's happening in politics or whatever. But I also think about this in sort of quieter times. Like as a mom, I do not think of myself as like a natural mom. And I'm using quotations, like my fingers are doing the little obnoxious quotation thing. Obviously I'm a natural mom in the sense that I gave natural birth and she's my child, but I didn't take to it. I've not taken to motherhood that in a way that I envy other women have. And it was tough when she was little, and I felt like being a mom of a baby and a toddler was a constant struggle. It was just, I felt like it was just nothing but struggle. And then at a certain point I went, maybe I should be trying to enjoy this because I'm not going to get these years back, and everybody else tells me that these were some of the best years and I'm going to be missing them. I'm still not convinced I'm going to be missing all those baby years. She was cute and she was snuggly and there were some cool things, but... You
like watching the videos now.
The videos are adorable and I kind of prefer to see the videos as opposed to live it. And I'm glad that we live in a time period where we could capture them all. She's 7 now, 7.5, and she and I are playing cards together and we read stories together and we tell stories together, and she's getting smarter and we have real conversations, real dialogue. And I don't feel like being a mom is a struggle anymore. I really enjoy being a mom at this point. I'm really enjoying it. And yeah, it's not all perfect, but it's definitely much better than when she was little. Now, is that just because she's gotten older and so I'm not a great mom to a baby and a toddler and I just needed her to get older? Or is it that I realized that I had to make peace with my situation and that I needed to stop seeing it as, a struggle or suffering? And I think the answer is a little both, right? And that's what happens, I think, when you hang back from this idea of things having to be a struggle, when you hang back from this idea that you have to suffer for things. I think over time, your wiring changes and alters, and eventually you go, there could be some pleasure in this. This could be a positive experience. It used to be that people, had these quips like, if you're not having fun, what's the point of doing it? And that could be anything. That could be, I don't know, a hunger strike. It could be literally anything a person was doing. And they'd be like, I'm just going to have fun doing whatever I'm doing. And I fear that in the modern world, we are assigning nobility to negative emotions. We're assigning some sort of, I don't know, we're more developed, more evolved people if we are doing everything with like a nod to how hard this all is and how awful this all is that we have to deal with this.
If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention.
Yeah, exactly. This idea that we must be dealing with all of this with heavy, dark emotion. And you even see that when you make recommendations. Like in the early days of our podcast, we made a lot of recommendations for how to basically stay in a good mood. Like, how do you feel positive? Let's stay in a good mood and stay positive. The reason for that is because positivity takes a lot less resource, right? Negative emotions, dark, dense emotions, they're a resource hog. They steal a lot from us. And if we can get into positive, good frames, we're spending less resource on our mood. And now our resource can now be focused on things like contribution. But we get so much pushback for insinuating that people should be trying to be in a good mood because there's some sort of nobility in all these negative emotions. Now, I would agree that there is nobility in processing our emotions. Nobility in the sense that, I mean, I don't know if it's noble, but it certainly is it's a pursuit that gets us back to positivity. If we have a bunch of dense negative emotions living inside of us, sweeping them under the rug is definitely not going to help. They're still there. They're just robbing your resource, from the shadows. So processing them all, allowing them all to reach whatever level of the top of the sine curve they need to, definitely positive. But this idea that we need to stay there, that there's some sort of benefit or some sort of statement rather you're making when you're staying in these outraged negative emotions. I think that this is a distraction. I think it's a noble distraction people are doing. I think it's, like we talked about, a deferred life program where we're kicking the can of our lives down the road, and we'll live our real lives once we've done whatever this other battle is. And if you're not acknowledging that life is happening now in whatever way it's happening, and recognizing that like acceptance is part of all of this dance, then you're allowing your resource to get hogged up and burned up in order to get to have your ego pat itself on the back a little bit. Like, I mean, it's basically the same game everybody's playing in every other incarnation. You just think that you're somehow, I don't know, superior for your version.
Yeah. I mean, you're struggling today. Who promised you tomorrow? You have no idea if you're going to be here tomorrow. And today's all we have, right? It's like this idea of deferring our lives. And trust me, I'm preaching myself here.
Yeah, this is a lot of these podcasts are us talking to ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just not just picking on you listening. I mean, this is something I've struggled with all the time. It's like today is the day, right? I'm not promised tomorrow. No one's orchestrating that to make sure it happens. I'd like to be here tomorrow, but I can't guarantee it. So all I can do is live right now.
If you're not going to be here tomorrow, can you take the trash out tonight?
Sure enough.
Okay.
That's probably a good idea. I think as we talk about this too, Dave Logan's book, Tribal Leadership, comes to mind. He came up with a really interesting model in that book. It's a 5-part model. The book is designed and written for organizations like businesses and nonprofits to help them move their employees and, the people on the team through different levels of this. And it's also a way to identify where people are on your team and where your company is as a whole. So you could use this as a model to help see yourself, help see your culture, your little, your localized culture, your people group of friends, family, and your broader culture of whatever country and, region you live in as well. And so I'll just kind of go through these 5 parts of this model, the 5 levels of this model, and we can talk a little bit about it. But I think this might be informative as we talk about this today, this struggle idea. So level 1 of tribal leadership is basically this idea of the universe sucks. Everything is horrible and terrible. I suck, you suck, the universe sucks, just everything's bad. Nothing is good, and there's just total negativity. Obviously, these people would never be inside of an organization or a culture in any useful way because they just see life and everything is they see the universe as just sucking.
They're like human anchors.
Yeah.
But not in the good way.
Like weighing us down kind of anchors. I don't think very many people live here. I think a lot of these people have a lot of issues, and if you run into somebody like this, it's very apparent that they're in this place if they're there long term. But it is a place where some people live, and we probably know of people that like this in our lives or around us in some way, but it's not very many people. But the next level up from that, level 2 in tribal leadership, is the universe is okay. The universe doesn't suck. Everything is okay in the universe, but my life sucks. My existence, my personal existence sucks. So the friends and family around me are okay. The universe is fine. Maybe even the company I work for is fine, whatever, but my life sucks. Everything happens bad to me. The Eeyore syndrome, right? It's just, oh, woe is me. Life is bad. And then level 3, and this is where a lot of people, I think, live and work and exist, is I'm awesome. You all suck. So I'm great. I'm kind of egocentric. This is like an egocentric place where I'm great, but everybody else, these are the critics of the world, right? I'm the smartest. I'm good. I'm awesome. You over there suck. And if only you would be better, life would be better for everyone, especially me, because I'm awesome already. And then level 4 is, it starts to get collective at level 4, where it says, we're awesome. So your friend, family group, your social group that you're a part of, maybe your company or your church or your culture that you're localized with, we are awesome. Everyone else sucks. So everybody out there sucks. The other groups suck, but my group's great. I'm great and my group's great. Those groups out there suck. All the other things that aren't part of our group suck. And then level 5 is the universe is awesome, meaning I'm awesome, you're awesome, all this is awesome, great place to be, universe is incredible.
What I think is interesting, because I think we've mentioned this model in the past, I think what's interesting in relationship to this current conversation is it shows particularly at level 4, because Dave Logan talked about how in companies, this model's supposed to be to help people in companies, encourage and bring up morale in their employees or their team members. And he mentioned that one of the best ways to get people to go up these different levels is to encourage them. I mean, you can't skip steps. So if you've got somebody who's like, my life sucks, you've got to get them up to 3, which is, I'm awesome, everybody else sucks. And you've just got to get them there. And this is like the place that most professionals live. And then one of the healthiest places to be, though, is for all the team members to be at 4. And the way to do that is by basically inventing an enemy outside of the company. And the competition is what sort of sparks up this camaraderie with other team members. And I think it's interesting to take this model out from just a corporate lens and see it how it applies in general to people. Because I think this is one of the reasons why, bringing it back to the conversation around suffering, or not suffering rather, but struggle, this is one of the reasons why people attach to concepts like struggle, because it's giving them a temporary purpose. Just like competing against another company gives that company and the team members camaraderie and purpose together. They're all fighting the same fight. Struggle gives us a sense that we're fighting some fight with other people. It gives us a sense of camaraderie with like-minded individuals, the people who agree with me and are all doing the struggle together. It gives people this idea that they're part of something bigger. And that's one of the reasons why, probably it's one of the nodes in the system for why struggle is so sticky. It's one of the reasons we get addicted to it, is that we feel like we're part of something. And if we let go of the struggle, the fear is we're being disloyal, not just to the cause, but to all the other people who are struggling also. That we're somehow saying that, like we shouldn't have to struggle even though so many other people are struggling. Not really taking into account the fact that they could also choose to not struggle as well. Like nobody needs to be struggling really. Again, it's going to be something that happens in life, just like the Buddhist concept of suffering. We might not have built the skill development yet to be able to deal with the amount of pain we're experiencing for it not to feel like suffering. And we might honestly be taking on extremely large challenges that are maybe we bit off more than we can chew, or it's legit a very difficult challenge and it feels like a struggle because we don't have the skill development to be able to deal with that challenge head on and just simply handle it. So I believe that struggle is something that is inevitable, but it's also sometimes and often, maybe more times than we like to believe, a choice. And when we're choosing it because we don't want to be disloyal to other people because they're also struggling and we want to be in sympathy with them, the question is, could they also let go of struggle? Could everybody, for the most part, be letting go of struggle and hitting these challenges a little bit more straightforward and head on, and not feel like we're being disloyal simply because we're not feeling all these negative emotions?
I think that's a really good point. I think of the Cold War after World War II between the United States and the Soviet Russians, whereas you had two global powers united in their own versions of each other. Like the United States was united, or the West in quotes, and then Soviets in quotes, and kind of the world started to position itself on one side or the other. Smaller countries would alliance with these two global powers, and there was this notion of we're all in this together against those guys over there. And I think we intuitively get this, that we want an other to collect us and get us cohesive. So this idea of struggle, was used even by the powers that be on the global war on terror, trying to unite people against a common enemy somewhere out there, right? All of us are united against this. It didn't work that well the second time around after the Cold War. And now I almost look at the culture wars maybe trying to do the same thing in a way. They're desperately looking for the next, commies, in quotes, metaphorically speaking, or global terrorism, in quotes, metaphorically speaking, in whatever that might be. But the problem is we're doing it to each other on a more local level in whatever country, region, or area you live in.
Which is effectively why everybody calls everybody else, like everything that's happening in politics these days is tribalism.
Correct.
Right, because it's all what its roots in. Its roots are in like when tribes would clash and fight each other for land closer to the river or whatever.
Yeah, so as somebody that tracks intent, I look at this idea of struggle, that addiction to struggle, as an unconscious attempt at us to get cohesion. Like we do want cohesion. The problem is we don't all agree on worldviews and perspectives. And so this idea of this struggle emerges now, and now we get attached to a struggle that not everyone agrees with. It wasn't good. The McCarthy era in the 1950s wasn't good, where we're locking people up if they're communists. But I would say, as an example, the United States as a country was more cohesive at that time. There wasn't as much room for people to have individuality in things, and individual expressions or individual political or cultural ideas. So that wasn't very good, but there was a little more of a cohesion there. And I think people that lived through that time period recognized it, and we intuitively get what that looks like. And I think there's an attempt for that again, and the challenge is in a postmodern world, when we don't all see things the same way anymore, especially now, that's not going to happen again. We're never going to get back to where we're all cohesively organized around a common enemy. And so I think what's going to require us as humans is to get from tribal 4 to tribal 5 of the universe is awesome. And that's also idealistic when I say it in some ways, because how the heck are we going to do that with all these conflicting worldviews? I mean, there's a lot of challenge with that. And I think the biggest thing that the message I take away from is that's even beyond the conversation here. I mean, we can't solve that problem, right? Or challenge at all. And I would say we can still individually start to look at this struggle idea and our addictions to it. Because I think the only way that we're actually going to affect change in the world is for individuals like you listening right now and me and Antonia to change our hearts and minds and starting to attune ourselves in different directions. It has to start with the individual, because I don't think the collective can do it. The collective creates too much tribe, right? Too much tribal conflict. It's only going to take individuals. If I like rap and I only like rap, I'm going to conflict with people that like country music and only like country music. But as an individual, if I can like both music genres, and even more than that, I can like punk and rock and other things, well, now I'm a more rounded individual that can interface with all sorts of musical likes and dislikes, right? I have more options at my disposal, and I can get along with people in various elements of the musical world. So I change myself as the individual, and now I can move and float between these different subgroups of musical purists, around just the music that I like to listen to. And that's kind of how I think of that as like a metaphor for what I'm talking about here.
Well, and you don't even have to like country to not suffer when somebody's playing it. You know what I mean? To take your metaphor. It's like, I don't like country. I probably will never like country music. But when I was young, I used to act like a person was torturing me if they put it on. And now it's just like, okay, that's just something that's not my deal. And so this idea of like the struggle when somebody's not, they don't agree with you, then I think that you just kind of get to a more neutral, curious place. But I think I think you going down that line of thinking that you kind of a little bit abandoned, because you said that was bigger than the scope of this particular subject. I'm glad that you went down that road, though, because it illustrates what people's unconscious line of reasoning is leading to, which is that if you feel like you have to be struggling until the world gets the way that you just described it, Joel, which is, as you said it, impossible, then it really is a deferred life program. It really is you choosing and deciding to be in a perpetual state of struggle until the world perfectly matches whatever your personal ideal is, which is not going to happen in your lifetime. So why choose that? Why choose to be in perpetual struggle unless you get to see this idealized version of reality manifest in front of you. You can continue to work for what it is that you believe is positive and good in the world. You can continue to work for causes and stand up for, I don't know, the disenfranchised, or make sure that people are being respected and honored, or, you know, make sure that the environment is honored, or whatever it is that is your thing, right? The thing that you believe is super important. You can do all that while having, I think what's coming up for me actually is two things. The antidote against struggle is two things that's become clear as we've been talking. The first one is gratitude, and the second one is purpose. You can do all the things that you would like to see the world manifest in the world while still maintaining gratitude and a sense of purpose. Gratitude is, look how far we've come. And if you can't see how far we've come, then you're intentionally neglecting progress, right? Because it's not the idealized final form. You can choose to neglect all of that if you want to, but you're being wildly inaccurate. And if you're being wildly inaccurate, then you're being wildly uncalibrated to what needs to happen next. And you're not going to get your end game no matter what, because you're not living in reality. So acknowledging how much progress has been made and being grateful for that gives a person a sense of hope. It gives a person a sense that things can continue to progress and get better. And that sense of hope gives a little sense of not needing to be in so much of a state of agitation, right? Like, things are okay. They're better than they were, and they're probably going to continue to get better. And that's a good thing. So that's the first one, is a sense of gratitude. And even if they're not the way you want them to be, even if you feel like more work needs to be done, that still buoys you up and helps you remember that things are not all doom and gloom. So gratitude is a big piece of this. And the second one is purpose. I think I'm seeing a lot of people throw spaghetti against the wall. They're looking for one of these causes to be the thing that is their purpose. But one of the challenges I've seen, at least in modern, I think probably in the last couple of years, I've really observed this, is that we don't pick our dharma picks us. And so you can want one of these causes to be your dharma. You can want it to be your thing that you're put on earth for, but we don't really get to decide that. Our dharma shows up and it tells us what it is that we're going to be doing. And sometimes it's something that you wouldn't choose. Like, quite frankly, I don't know why my dharma is to talk about personality types. That seems like the most baffling thing on the planet to me. The more I think about the fact that my job, at least at the planet right now, is to sit in front of a microphone and talk about personality types. I mean, sometimes it just seems absurd to me. And yet here I am. And this is my dharma for the moment. I don't know if I would have chosen it. I just happen to be really good at it, and it's changing people's lives. So I keep doing it, and so my dharma changes. And I think this idea of surrendering to purpose as opposed to shoehorning purpose means that when you find your purpose, it doesn't have to be filled with agitation and struggle. Like, when you're on your purpose, it feels effortless. I mean, to some extent, it's always effort. But it doesn't feel like you're wrestling against it. It doesn't feel like it's like this, I don't know, like this burden on top of you. It feels like the thing you're supposed to be doing, even if it's baffling and doesn't make any sense to you. This is the thing you're supposed to be doing. And I wonder sometimes if this idea of struggle that people, like, they turn into their identity and they won't let go of, and this is so important, I wonder if that's their synthetic version of purpose. It's like their synthesized version of dharma. And I feel like if people would let themselves sort of, I don't know, surrender to the thing they're supposed to be doing, if that happens to be one of these causes, I've seen people in these causes, cheerful, happy people, doing the thing that they're put on the planet to do, clearly loving every second of it, even if there's a lot of work that needs to be done, because they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I feel like this idea that if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention, if you're not struggling, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, the struggle is real. I feel like that's all signaling to other people. And I've also noticed that they want you to be struggling. Like this, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. And this idea that people need to be getting involved in the things that are super important to this individual. And I've seen Facebook messages or posts about how, like, well, people who are not doing this are being irresponsible, because that's the thing that they're filling their Facebook wall with, and everybody else should be caring so much about the thing they're caring about. It's like, Well, aren't you just kind of forcing your dharma onto everybody else? And if you're doing that, are you really on your dharma? Is that really your purpose? Do you understand how purposes and dharmas work? Like, I sometimes wonder if people just kind of feel like, like dharmas are like clothes you get at a consignment shop or something. You just toss it on and go, okay, I guess this is the thing I'm doing. And if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit, right? So to me, when I see people struggling, like choosing struggle, getting addicted to struggle, to me, it doesn't feel like the real thing. It feels like an artificial version of the real thing. And when I see people on their purpose and absolutely like aligned with their dharma, I see people who they're not burning good resource on struggle. Their resource is too precious to them. There's too much to do. There's too much to accomplish. Struggle is a resource hog that they cannot afford if they're actually going to be doing the thing that they're put on the planet to do, whatever that means. So yeah, to me, getting addicted to struggle is like getting addicted to anything else. It's just a distraction away from the thing you're supposed to be doing. I'd abandon it and start figuring out what that dharma is and surrendering into it so that you have all your resource for that. And to me, that's the most aligned quality life.
The idea of gratitude and purpose is fantastic to throw out there. I'm sure there's more things too that can help with this. And I think the question that I come back to, that I posited earlier, of what happens after the struggle, if it was removed, the thing you're pushing against right now and struggling against, whatever that is, at whatever zoom in or zoom out of it, might be something really big or something really small. If that's removed from you, what happens next? I'm reminded of an interview I listened to on NPR a few years ago. It was like 20 years ago, probably. It was with Terry Gross on Fresh Air out of Philadelphia. And she had an interviewee on there who was a former neo-Nazi member of, I think it was called Hammerskin Nation or something like this. It was a neo-Nazi organization out of Southern California. He was a prominent member, and he had left that organization. He renounced being a neo-Nazi and was obviously on Terry Gross's show to talk about this. And she asked him the question. She said, what got you to leave being a neo-Nazi? What got you to leave this organization? Because he talked about how they would recruit high school students outside of high schools, and they'd have these big punk rock concerts in the desert. And they had this whole strategy for boosting up their numbers. And their goal was to create separation of the races, to purify the races. In fact, to the point where as leaders, he would sit down with Black African Americans leadership, and they talk about how they were going to try to separate their races more. Like they actually got along at the leadership level to keep the races pure. It was really weird stuff he was talking about. And she asked him, how did you get out of this? He said he was having beer with one of his buddies, or he's talking with one of his buddies one day, and they were just talking about their objectives, the struggle they were going through to purify the races in the world. And he looked at his buddy and he said, okay, you know what do you think happens when the struggle's over? What do you think happens at the end of all this? Let's say we accomplish our objectives. Let's say the races become pure and we separate and we live in a world where we're all, in our tribes away from each other racially. What then? And he said his friend turned to him and looked at him and said, well, at that point, we start separating by eye color. And he said that statement hit him so hard because he realized, there's no end to this. This is an addiction. This struggle is something that is going to go on forever. We're just going to keep separating ourselves to the end of time if we accomplish our objectives here and now. This is basically it was like a religion or like a viewpoint of never ending, right? It was an ideal that could never be realized.
Almost the point of it.
Exactly. And at that point, he said he started to unravel his belief structure there. And that was the moment where he started moving out of that organization and being a neo-Nazi and totally changed his life around. So my question to you listening right now, and myself as well, and Antonia, is what's our eye color? What happens for us, metaphorically speaking? Let's say the struggle is realized, the thing you're struggling for or against. Let's say it's either removed or realized. What comes next? What are you going to do with the addiction that you've built toward the struggle? What are you going to do with that fervor and idealism toward the struggle? What comes after that? And I think that question can really point us to the lowest common denominator, at least the end of the road of what does this lead us to? Which slope are we sliding down to at the end of all of this? What's the vision of what we're trying to accomplish here? And I bet you 9 times out of 10, we don't really have a vision for it. We're just addicted to the emotions of it because of what Antonia mentioned, the Deferred life program. We don't have a purpose or vision for our lives, and so we get caught up in this because it makes us feel like we have a purpose or a vision for our lives. So what happens if the struggle's removed, and what could you start thinking about right now to put in place in your life to move toward and look toward to create in the world, like we've been talking about, that will actually lead you to fulfillment and purpose and your mission and happiness and joyfulness in your life?
Well, and that's a really good example of how arbitrary things can get. If you are allowing yourself to have an artificial version of the real thing when it comes to purpose, then it gets real arbitrary real quick. And I don't think anybody wants to throw their lives away on something arbitrary.
So what's coming up for you? You've been listening to this conversation. You haven't had a microphone, but now's your turn to come over to personalityhacker.com and leave your comment, ask your question, or share your story directly below this podcast. We want to hear from you.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. Leave a rating and review on iTunes. That helps us out a lot. Our book is out. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major online retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review of our book on Goodreads or Amazon, that also helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.